Hello and welcome to a video on what did the Romans ever do for Britain. So one of the things that the Romans did for Britain was that they brought baths. The Romans liked to use bathhouses for keeping clean, but they didn't. It wasn't just a case of going there to get washed. It was also a bit of a social occasion. You would meet friends there, and you would do things like lift weights, and you would have in certain areas of the empire, you would have slaves to help clean you, and they would have hot areas and cold areas for you to move through. The people in Britain before the Romans came, their washing habits were using rivers and lakes to wash in, typically cold water. Anyone who lives upstream of you, if they are dumping waste into the river, you end up washing in that waste. And we still have baths today. So if you've ever been to a swimming pool, for example, the first ideas of having a pool you could congregate in and meet your friends and have leisure activities is something that we owe the Romans. Roads. So in Britain before the Romans came, you didn't really have you didn't have paved roads at all. You would have had worn dirt paths which people walked along, and the path would just be beaten out by people walking there. Sometimes you would cut turf so that you had a prepared path, but it wouldn't be paved. Now the Romans, they built roads to help their armies march. If you can march on a road, it's a lot quicker than trying to fight your way through a load of undergrowth and over hills and through fields and whatnot. And it was also very useful for the Roman trade network. It's easier to transport goods on roads because there's less chance of them getting broken or carts being damaged. And a lot of the Roman roads that were built in Britain, unbelievably, they're still used today. They've been built on top of, but the original Roman roads and the routes that they were are still being used. So there's famous Roman roads like Watling Street. Watling Street was one of the main Roman roads, and all the Roman roads tended to lead, in Britain at least, to the main areas that the Roman army was. Even now, you can still find remnants of Roman roads that haven't entirely been built on top of. It's quite possible, and in fact some of you will know, that it's definite that there are Roman roads where we live. Medicine! He's not looking a very happy fella there, but yeah, medicine. So Roman medicine, it's not as advanced as medicine is now, obviously. We're talking thousands of years ago. But they had specialised doctors, they had surgeons, they understood things like amputations, they understood how illnesses could affect people, they did a lot of work for medicines. They used herbs, they could do operations. It's a reason why a lot of people in Britain before the Romans came had a lower life expectancy, because they didn't really have doctors. They had people that would try and use healing herbs, but beyond that they didn't really have much knowledge. Whereas Roman doctors, if you think of how large the Roman Empire was, stretching from Britain, right across right down through France, or what was Gaul, to Italy, and then right around the Mediterranean to North Africa, Greece, starting to head towards where Alexander the Great conquered, over towards modern day Turkey. There's a lot of medical knowledge from these places that the Romans did with what they did with a lot of things. The Romans stole it and started using it themselves. So the Romans brought their own medical knowledge to Britain. Sewers! Yes, one thing that we don't like to think about, sewers. In Britain before the Romans came, all of your sewage, every time you go to the toilet, you have two choices. You can do it in the river, Or you can do it in a bucket or something similar, and then remove that bucket to somewhere, or I suppose you can dig a hole and do it into the hole. None of those options are particularly wonderful. If you're using the river as your toilet, that's also where you're washing yourself and your clothes, and where you're getting your drinking water from. And everybody upriver of you is doing the same thing. If you're doing it into a bucket, someone's got to carry that bucket and empty it. If you're doing it into a hole near your home, eventually that hole's going to get full, and then you've got to dig another hole. So the Romans, being the very, very clever people that they were, what they did is that they actually created underground sewers, and some of them were that large that you could walk through them no problem. And in fact, some of the rumours I've heard is that you could actually ride a horse and cart through them. And Roman sewers form the basis of a lot of modern day sewers. Some of them in some countries are in fact still working. Now you might think, oh, it's a bit disgusting, but if you think of the amount of disease that all of this sewage could carry, if you were standing in it now, or if you had your hands in it, you would know that you need to have a good wash to get rid of any germs. Imagine if that was just out in the open near where you live, or where you were getting your water from. You would become very, very ill very, very quickly. So the Romans building sewers helped improve public health. It also made people a lot happier, because when the Romans were around, suddenly people weren't living in their own sewage. So we've got to be thankful for the Romans bringing us sewers. And just going off this slide a little bit, the Romans did use their building to improve a lot of things. So it's not just sewers and roads, but if you think of things like toilets, they had the Roman toilets, public toilets, went into sewers. Although now we'd say it's a bit horrible the way that they did all these things. Back then, it was a massive, massive technological improvement. Gardens. This is something which is always missed. Gardens. Now, before the Romans came, British people, the Celts and the natives here, didn't really use gardens in the same way. So their gardens were purely practical. They would have an area of land where they would grow food, and near their house, or right outside their house, and depending on the settlement they lived in, that would be where they grew their food. They might keep animals in it, which they would bring it into the house when it was cold weather, and they may grow herbs as well. When the Romans came, they refined this process. They had their own specialised way of farming, which was a lot more productive. So naturally, that's what they did. It was better. And then in their gardens, it became areas of enjoyment, of relaxation. So you can see there, that's not an exact Roman garden. That's a bit of a modern one inspired by a Roman garden. But you can see the idea. It's beautiful, lots of flowers, open space, wonderful, wonderful areas. And they didn't really grow food in them. That was the job of farms. They might grow herbs in their gardens, things that would taste nice with food, or that were sweet smelling. And a lot of the food that the Romans grew, I think I mentioned it a little bit later in the video, but we have to be thankful for that as well. But the gardens are areas of relaxation, areas to enjoy yourself, rather than just practical areas to get food. Food, there we are. I did say I was mentioning it later rather. So the Romans brought a lot of different foods to Britain, foods that we wouldn't have now, things like chickens, cabbage. I'm sure we're all grateful for the Romans bringing us cabbage. We all love cabbage. A lot of things which we still eat today. But they also brought recipes which we wouldn't consider today. So I don't think any of us are going to go home or sit at home and have field mice for lunch. But Roman cookery was again a big step up again. So in Britain, a lot of food was roasted or boiled because those were the easiest ways to cook it. You roast it over a fire or you boil it in water. And a lot of the food was fairly bland. There was no spices, no herbs. Again, the Romans, having their massive empire, had foods from lots and lots of different countries. Now, in Roman times, if you wanted food and you were poor, you had to get it yourself, make it yourself. If you were a bit richer, people would make it for you, and because of the massive empire, they had access to a lot more spices and options, which they brought to Britain. Now, if the Romans hadn't brought us all this food, would it have still got to Britain? Probably. But because the Romans were in charge for such a long time, we wouldn't have the same species, we wouldn't understand food in the same way. Obviously, in the modern era, if you want to have something to eat, you can pop to the shops and you can walk down the different aisles and you can find, oh well, there's chicken and turkey, and go down the next aisle and there's rice and there's pasta, and you go down the next aisle and there's spices and there's a whole rack of spices. In the Roman era, it was very, very expensive, and when they brought things over to Britain, rather than transport it again and again and again, they brought it and started growing it here, or started keeping it here. When they left, it carried on. It stayed here. They didn't dig up every farm and take it with them. And the people that lived in Britain before the Romans came, they learnt how to do things the Roman way, which includes eating the food and creating it. Animals, yes, some of the animals that they brought over. So I've already mentioned chickens. They also brought over things like cattle, different species of pigs, other birds, birds which did fly. They also brought over vegetables. So some of the vegetables that the Romans brought over. So the animals that the Romans actually brought to Britain, which was a massive increase on what we already had. So I've already talked about some of the vegetables, but they brought things: turnips, they brought apples, pears, celery, carrots, asparagus, grapes, wine. A lot of what the Romans brought wouldn't have looked the same as what we understand today. Obviously, as time goes on, food evolves, it looks a bit different. Now, as for animals, the Romans brought white cattle, rabbits, if anyone likes bunnies. If you've seen a rabbit, or you like rabbits, you can thank the Romans. Probably chickens. And the Romans didn't invent, but they sort of brought seafood as well. Bringing seafood to Britain was a brand new experience for a lot of the Britons, for people who lived in Britain, because if you lived close to the sea, it was a source of food. Anybody else, really, even if you lived a few miles from the sea, you wouldn't get your food from the sea because you wouldn't necessarily leave your own village. So when the Romans came with and built roads, improved the trade network, they started selling seafood on a much larger scale. And even now, Britain, fish and chips, it's a legacy left by the Romans. The Romans would also brought their own horses, dogs and cats. Now they may not have introduced them. It's difficult to say exactly when these animals were introduced to Britain, and there was definitely dogs in Britain beforehand, but the Romans would have brought new breeds because again they have such a large empire. Buildings. So you can see some ruins there. Now, Roman buildings, again, very, very clever builders. Whilst people in Britain were building out of wattle and daub, which is the woven wood with mud, straw and animal poo slapped onto the wall to help make it wind and waterproof, and thatching roofs out of straw, the Romans were building huge temples and public buildings out of stone and marble. And when they came to Britain, they brought that technology with them. They built things like the baths in the town of Bath. They built walls around cities. You can still see Roman walls. They had mosaics. It doesn't matter where you go certainly in England, you will see Roman ruins somewhere, and quite possibly the most famous is Hadrian's Wall, the huge border wall built between modern England and modern Scotland, in an effort to keep Pictish tribes out. Now the Romans were very, very intelligent. So we've mentioned roads. One of the things that the Romans actually had was concrete, which gets harder, gets stronger over time, and was also actually possible for it to set underwater. And it wasn't until recently that they discovered the secret ingredient. And one of the things that makes history difficult is people don't write down things which is in their day-to-day knowledge. So the Romans, their secret ingredient for their concrete was seawater, but nobody wrote seawater. They just wrote water, because everybody in Roman times knew it was seawater. So when archaeologists, modern day people, had a look at this recipe and went, well, why won't it work for us? And it's because nobody wrote it down. So if you think to yourself, oh, what did I do this morning? You might say, I got out of bed. But you haven't described the bed. You haven't described where the bed is kept. Okay, you haven't described what the bed is made out of. So in 1,000 years, or 2,000 years, if someone was to read that diary that you've written that I got out of bed, they go, well, right, okay, so they got out of bed. So how high was this bed that they had to actually get out of it? It's things like that which make them confusing. But Roman buildings, a lot of them were huge, so they had temples to their various gods, forts made out of wood. The Roman army built wooden forts, and so many different buildings and so many ruins that are still around, and right the way around the world. And a lot of them were, you can see excellent examples of Roman buildings in Pompeii, which was what's the word I'm looking for? Preserved is the word I'm looking for, which was preserved by volcanic eruption at Mount Vesuvius. And you can see just how intelligent they're building. They had buildings with more than one floor. They had buildings with different rooms made out of stone, beautifully decorated with paints. And again, as they did with a lot of things, they stole building technology from other places that they had conquered. Language. Yes, our alphabet descended from the Latin alphabet, which itself is descended from the Greek alphabet, because the Romans stole that as well. Even the word Britain is a Roman word. And things like, primary school comes from the word prime, comes from the Roman word primus or primus. So the Romans spoke Latin, and it's very, very difficult to understand Latin, because nobody speaks it anymore. It's a dead language, and B, there was different dialects. So if you were born in Rome, your Latin would sound different to somebody who was born in the south of the country, in Tarentum. And if you learnt how to speak Latin when the Romans invaded Britain, if you were a native Briton and you spoke Celt, okay, which is very close to modern day Welsh. If you spoke that language and were taught Latin, your accent would sound very, very different to what the Romans that came to Britain. And the Romans that came to Britain weren't all from Rome. Some of them were from modern day Germany. Some were from modern day Gaul. But our language is descended from Latin, and the English language is made up. It's actually about 5 languages just wearing a big coat, pretending to be one. So it's made up of Anglo-Saxon. It's made up of of Latin. It's made up of Celt. It's got a bit of Greek thrown in there, bits of French. But when we're talking or writing or reading, a lot of what we're looking at comes from the Latin. And when you think that the Roman invasion to the Romans leaving was a good few hundred years, the people who lived in Britain would be speaking 2 languages during that time. A lot of them, maybe not all, but a lot of them would be speaking their Celt language. And Celt languages differed as well. So if you were a Celt in modern day Sussex and a Celt in modern day County Durham, your accent would be different. And then if you learnt to speak Latin, your accents in that would be different as well. So a lot of different accents helps create a language. And place names as well. So anywhere that ends in Chester, into a Roman. So Manchester, for example, Chesterley Street, anything like that. If it ends in Chester, that word Chester is the Roman word, meaning fort or fortification or castle. Okay. Capital city, London, comes from the Latin word, which they themselves stole from the Celts that lived here. They didn't like the way the Celts said it, so they changed it to the way they like to say it. And then we changed it ourselves. And in 1,000 years, it probably won't be called London anymore. It'll have a different name. And the language evolved over time so that we're still using Latin words, and we're not really thinking about it when we do. But the Romans have left us with a huge, huge legacy. Lots and lots of different things. We have to be very, very grateful for. And it would be a very different country we lived in if the Romans had never conquered us. For a start, our language would be very, very different. Religion. Yes, religions. The Romans brought 2 religions at the same time. When the Romans invaded, it wasn't that long after the Bible tells us that Jesus had actually been crucified. So the Romans had 2 religions at the same time, which was Christianity and sort of a pagan, polytheistic, which means many gods, religion. So you can see some of them here. So we've got Neptune at the bottom there, god of the sea. Okay, you've got Atlas, who the person who was holding up the world. We've got Mars there, the god of war. So the Romans brought us that religion, and they brought us Christianity as well. And the religion that was already in Britain was its own form of paganism, and a lot of the gods sort of got moulded together. So a lot of I'm just trying to have a think. So I think Diana, for example, Minerva, sort of got moulded into 2 gods, and a lot of the religious festivals that were already in Britain were then adopted by the Romans, and used instead as Christian and their own version of paganism. At the same time, so that the religious festivals were held at the same time, and as time went on and the Romans left, the religious festivals just carried on at the same time, because we've always done it on this date, so we'll just carry on. Easter, for example, it was pagan in the ancient Britons and the Druids, it was the start of new life. When the world is coming out of winter, and we start seeing leaves on trees and flowers starting to grow, and it's all getting a bit warmer. It was a huge celebration, and that's carried on now. Easter, obviously now, in the Christian religion, is its own religious holiday, religious festival.